Great. Hello, everybody. Hi, good morning. Thank you to AppViewX. Thank you to Richard. That was a fantastic presentation that you gave to us. I do love this industry. I love that there's so much wonderful information sharing that happens, and that was a great example of that. Okay. So I am going to share my screen here. Okay. All right. So the title of my presentation, Securing Network Endpoints by Automating PKI Certificate Provisioning. And I'll kind of give you the story of Xcel Energy and how we've navigated this journey together with AppViewX over the past 3.5 years. So first, we'll go over our agenda here about Xcel Energy, and we'll talk about some of the news-making headlines recently.
Hey Jeff, I'm not able to see your screen yet.
Oh, you can't. Let's see here. Oh, I need to click on the share button. There we go. There we go. Okay.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I should probably say this. Thank you to AppViewX for inviting another engineer to present. We're not known for our glossies or our presentations. Typically, when we see a sales glossy, we kind of do this, right? And we're apprehensive to trust. So thanks for courageously inviting yet another security engineer to your wonderful event today. We're going to give you the unvarnished version of what life is like in a PKI seat. Okay, so with our agenda here, we'll talk a little bit about PKI and maybe how it differs from the internal network as opposed to that OT or operational technology network. We'll talk about the specific goals that we had, our business goals that our leadership had in going into our certificate management journey. And then we'll dig a little bit more into some of the requirements. I'll give you a little sneak peek, a little demonstration as to how we actually do certificate management here at Xcel Energy. And then we'll talk more about that project and why we chose AppViewX a number of years back and what that journey has been like. Okay. So first, Xcel Energy. We're a utilities company. We supply both electricity and gas services across 8 states. We have about 12,000 employees. We have about half of our people in Minneapolis and half in Denver. So it's kind of although we're headquartered here in Minneapolis, where I'm located, we do have a strong workforce in that Denver area as well. We are the first utility company to announce our aspirations to go carbon free. You know, the utility space is rather interesting in how this is undergoing change. I somewhat liken it to the radio industry, right? And radio, you know, FM radio used to be just a broadcast only, right? That's how you'd get your audio source, right? You'd just throw up your antenna, you'd receive the signal, and that was about it. But you know, now with the internet, people are making their own radio stations, right? You know, everybody's got podcasts and all sorts of dual transmission all over the place. Well, energy is quite similar now with wind farms, with geothermal, with solar panels. Individual moms and pops can supply energy back onto the grid, and that requires intelligent networks. So we are, even though we're a regulated monopoly, we are seeing tremendous amounts of change going on in our industry, and that requires us to be very sophisticated. And that change is only going to happen more rapidly in the future. You know, we're seeing all sorts of changes in IoT and cloud. We are seeing, you know, and we need to respond. We need to get ahead of that. And that means that we need to get into the business of automation, right? We have to make sure that we're on top of this wave instead of getting hit by this wave. Xcel Energy, so we are NASDAQ. I think we're NASDAQ number 53, one of the top 10 energy providers here in the United States. And I like to think that we've made some wonderful investments all throughout our cybersecurity portfolio. And so PKI and certificate management is certainly one of those. Okay, so ongoing security threats. You can't help but hear it. It's all over the news. There are all sorts of threats going on. Now, some of which are, perhaps can be alleviated by certificate management solutions. I've got a list of, 25, 30 companies, high profile things that have been hit by just certificate expiration, right, things. I think it was either Visa or MasterCard had a whole bunch of credit cards that, got expired. Google Voice went down. I think they were just down again for a second time because of a certificate expiration notice. The famous Equifax one of 2015, that was rather epic and caused by a certificate, or at least a contributing factor of a certificate expiration. And of course, all these ransomware things, all these ransomware events that are going on, which I've heard a number that there's approximately 4,000 ransomware attacks daily. So you've heard about the couple high profile ones, but there's all sorts of needs in cybersecurity and all sorts of resources being devoted, and it's quite a battle out there. And this industry is also very short on talent. Like so many other industries in the world, we're very short on talent. So we're being asked to do more and more with less and less. Hence the need. I'll go back to that kind of reoccurring theme of the need for automation and getting ahead of the game. I did want to touch on that Equifax one because I'm really fascinated by how Equifax not only was attacked and was so vulnerable, but also how they happened to respond to the event. Some fascinating bits of knowledge about that. So one of the things that they did in response is they stood up an entirely separate domain name. So rather than utilizing their trusted domain name of Equifax.com, they decided to stand up, purchase a completely separate DNS name, and then at least 7 times on their very own Twitter account, they happened to redirect people to a separate domain name. It was just an error it was a silly error, but they did it, and here they were kind of broadcasting or advertising a domain name that they don't even own. It just happened to be purchased by a security researcher who ended up, instead of performing some malicious acts, he decided to utilize that as maybe educating people on what not to do, and demonstrating how immature their response was to this solution. Again, Equifax caused by one of the primary causes is a expiring certificate. So we see all sorts of vulnerabilities that are out there, whether they're certificate vulnerabilities, whether they're malware, ransomware, types of attacks, TLS breaches, things like Heartbleed. It's an ever-changing landscape, and TLS is rather interesting in that, it has its origins back in 1994, 95, going back to Mozilla. So it has this reputation. It's a staple of any cybersecurity portfolio. It it's a staple, and yet we're seeing this grand resurgence now as networks become more and more complicated and dynamic. And we've got all sorts of devices that are outside of that trusted traditional perimeter. And as identity becomes that new perimeter, there's a heavier reliance upon tools like cryptographic technologies in which to secure that perimeter. So opportunity is there. Opportunity is there, and it's ever changing. It's ever dynamic. Let's talk a little bit about PKI in the IT and OT networks. So in our traditional enterprise networks, we have generally one Active Directory domain throughout. We can leverage at Xcel Energy. We leverage Active Directory certificate services. We can perform auto enrollment through much of that. That's how, for example, we get our client certificates on each of our laptops, right? And so, for example, when we are in the office and when we are on campus, we can utilize those client certificates to authenticate to our internal Wi-Fi network. That can happen all kind of, through the magic of Active Directory certificate services and auto enrollment. Same thing with our domain controllers is we can perform that auto enrollment once a year. Those things enroll for new certificates. It's rather seamless. It just works. You compare that to our OT network, and our OT networks are highly segmented. It might be because the architects, the designers of those networks had a bit of a mistrust. I know that one of our vendors that we use for some of our electric applications stood up 24 separate Active Directory domains, none of which, there's zero trust in between any of them. It certainly creates an interesting problem, and thereby prevents us from leveraging some of those Active Directory certificate services functionality of auto enrollment. So we looked at a vendor, we looked at AppViewX to help us solve that problem of going cross-boundary, and we'll get into that in a little bit. It's a highly regulated environment. Our previous speaker, Richard Barstow, spoke of NERC SIP and ECMS, which is an electronic access and control and monitoring system. And there's different ways to skin this cat, right? You can, some energy companies treat just their SIP environment, and they roll out a separate PKI, separate root even, right? Separate root, separate policy, separate Active Directory certificate service environment, and even separate AppViewX environments, completely air-gapped between the two. Firewalls in between, and our OT and IT systems do not communicate. So with that sort of an isolation, makes for a little bit more maintenance. Just the cost of maintaining two separate systems. Next, we have kind of a divergence of devices out there, right? We talked a little bit about how the electrical grid is ever changing. We have smart meters that are out there in the field deployed. These are systems that are attached to homes and residences that can govern the electricity either coming on, perhaps shutting down a home's air conditioning unit until a more cost-friendly time during the day, or a smart meter that takes on electricity from solar panels on the roof. And so, those are certainly considered off your traditional networks when they're deployed in the field like that. Highly segmented OT environment, I alluded to that before. We've got dozens and dozens of domains and forests in a very segregated environment, which again presents challenges for our Kerberos certificates as well as our RDP certificates. All right, I think we've, there's been news lately of RDP attacks. So what do you do on that port 3389? Machines are stood up and RDP services are turned on for every machine. You can do a remote desktop to any machine out there. But when you hit port 3389, you'll see a self-signed certificate and subsequently that yellow box, right? That yellow certificate warning box. And so optimally, you'll want to deploy trusted certificates, signed certificates out to port 3389. But again, with that highly segregated environment, what's the best way to do that? And a tool like AppViewX can help with the deployment, especially when using protocols, more advanced protocols, things like EST, enrollment over secure transport, or ACME protocol services, which was stood up by the Internet Engineering Task Force and Let's Encrypt a number of years back to help automated enrollments. Finally, you've got some multi-cloud challenges. I think it's probably more common than not that companies are hedging their bets on which is going to be the big cloud service out there, right? It's going to be Amazon, Google, Azure, IBM, Salesforce. And so Xcel Energy, we stood up HashiCorp, which kind of is a multi-cloud broker. And to facilitate things like microservices and very short-lived certificates, containers, we empowered that environment with its very own certificate authority. So it's much like opening up a passport office and delegating authority to that multi-cloud environment and allowing that multi-cloud environment to then manage its own certificates. So, one of the great things about PKI is that it's quite a toolbox. There's lots of different ways you can solve various problems around here. And I think it's important that PKI designers and implementers continue to think out of the box, especially to service things like DevSecOps out in the field. So, standing up a delegated certificate authority is a good solution to those short-lived certificates. Then there's less friction in obtaining device certificates, right? Machine identities, and a lot of manufacturers are responding. VMware, for example, has its own certificate authority. It's called VMCA. Again, allows the VMware environment to manage its own certificates. You'll still want visibility into those because unless you restrict your namespaces through things like DNS, and unless you restrict those things, you're still going to want visibility. Because the last thing you want is two separate CAs, providing certificates to kind of across domains. So you want to be careful about that. You want to make sure that you have a good visibility. Okay, business goals. So at Xcel Energy, we had a couple stops and starts, and finally we decided to pour in a few $1 million into our PKI and certificate management systems approximately 4 years ago. And at that time, where we also performed a SHA-1 to SHA-2 upgrade, we brought in some HSMs to protect our root and certificate authority private keys. And we had I think, so like so many other companies, we had problems knowing how many certificates were on our network. There was a lack of standardization, all different sorts of key sizes and signing authorities. We didn't know where the certs were installed in our network. And we had a horrible ownership problem. Like so many enterprise companies, we had a number of contractors, and those contractors would come in and individually they would request certificates. They would deploy those certificates, and 18 months later they were gone, and the certificate would expire without notice. And so we wanted to get a handle of certificate ownership and notification. That was kind of our first priority. We also saw this as an opportunity to teach. We had PKI is a bit of a, some of the concepts can be a struggle for people. It might not be intuitive. For example, we had a lot of engineers that thought that certificates had to be like pre-shared keys, right? That certificates had to be deployed on both the server and the client. And that's not how TLS works. So we took this as an opportunity to train individuals. And so when an individual, for example, if they need a web server certificate, we'll meet with them and we'll use that as an opportunity to not only share what we're passionate about and that kind of cryptography 101, but it gives them an opportunity to go back to their team and tell the team how simple it is to deploy certificates, which only encourages the use of more and more security throughout the company. No longer are internal networks just trusted by default. No longer do we have that perimeter that's in the DMZ of, everything inside the network is safe. You can trust everybody, and everything outside is you can trust nobody. The ever-changing landscape means that we try to encrypt network channels that are inside the corporation now. So you're just going to see, no longer are there certificates just in the DMZ, right? It's not just on the perimeter anymore. As I said before, certificate expirations, huge problem for us. The time to deploy certificates, it was a very onerous process in which, individuals would come in once a year, once every 2 years, and they would spend all day creating their CSRs. And because it's so error prone, they'd make a series of mistakes. It would be an all-day effort. And conveniently, they would forget everything they know and have to repeat the process once a year, once every 2 years. And so we wanted to give our application administrators not just the training, of course, but also give them a self-service portal experience and a delightful experience in which they can come in and request their own certificates, deploy certificates, and manage their certificates so that they have visibility into what they're responsible for. So pushing some of that onus back to them was not just us getting off the hook. It promoted a security awareness within our corporation that I can't tell you how many people, they come away with thank yous, right? They come away learning something. They come away feeling excited about security. They feel like they're part of the solution. And that's just been one of the most beautiful things to witness is, people understanding and feeling confident that they can do this themselves. Business goals, I wanted to make a mention of defense in depth. And these are just some examples for identity access management. the tens of millions of dollars that we poured in, all the human energy that we poured into things like privileged access management and our CyberArk investments, multi-factor authentication. Here I've got my RSA dongles. Look, multiple environments. We've got single sign-on. We've got identity access, identity governance. So we're leveraging SailPoint more and more, and it's also helping us to automate the provisioning of identities, as well as when an employee should leave out the door. It allows us to get a centralized perspective of where all those identities have been deployed to, and making that deprovisioning process so much easier. And then, of course, the public key infrastructure. Like I said, we made this migration from SHA-1 to SHA-2, and so we deployed our Encipher HSMs throughout the organization. Let's see, I want to make another point about this is, we've all seen in the news this kind of reactionary, it's almost like, ransomware hits and, we have to react, and more onus is being transferred from a reactionary to a preventative deployment model. And so, organizations like the ones that provide identity, there's more and more onus on engineers and architects like us to make sure that we don't even get to that reactive spot, right? It's identity is that front end, it's that front gate to cybersecurity. And so, you put enough investment into that front gate, and hopefully it'll pay off dividends and decrease costs on the reactionary, right? I mean, it's probably going to be more expensive in the end to have to pay your marketing team to, send out all those reactionary apologies to your customers than it would be to keep the gates closed and guarded at the front end. So, just note I think there's going to be a shift more and more to that front end, and deploying our soldiers to the front gates. World-class PKI, things like offline, right? Offline physical root systems, right? These, every now and then I have to fly to our data center in another state, hop on an airplane, because our root and policy servers are offline. They don't have network cards in them. There's absolutely no way that you can attack those things or gain access to the root private key without marching into that data center. And we do that because we expect for our adversaries to have to do the same thing. There's just no way that a state actor can attack us from their own presence. They would literally have to gain access into our data center and go through all the steps and procedures to obtain access to those root private keys. It's funny how some of the most secure things you can do in cybersecurity can only be done with a USB thumb drive. And then the last business goal is vendor agility. So I know a lot of times we talk about crypto agility, but it was very important for our business leadership to make sure that we weren't going to get a vendor lock-in, right? So the first call that we made was to Gartner. We had a talk with David Mahdi over there at Gartner, who told us to bring in, 3 neutral CLM vendors, and so that's really kind of how our journey started. And we wanted to make sure that we weren't going to be locked into one vendor or another. Okay, now I'll talk a little bit about our functional requirements. So notifications, making sure that that no certificate was going to go unexpired. We wanted for AppViewX to serve as a registration authority. So that means that users log into the AppViewX portal using their credentials. Those credentials are checked against Active Directory. In some cases, well, we're starting to stand up an MFA requirement as well. So if folks want access to our cryptographic key portal, to which they can only see their own individual keys, nonetheless, we still will be checking their MFA credentials as well. Functional requirement to the self-service portal. Again, they can come in there, they can create their own CSRs, they can submit their own CSRs for the those higher security tools, right? Some of the cybersecurity tools that do not allow for the importation of a private key. The private key must be generated on device. So you want to make sure that you've got a tool that can handle both CSR generation as well as importation. Next would be API extensibility. We wanted to make sure, not only that our vendor was going to be neutral, right? Meaning, we weren't going to buy a DigiCert or a Global Sign or an Entrust package. We didn't want to be locked into those vendors. So not only were we looking for something that we're going to be public CA neutral, but we wanted to absolutely make sure that we had the extensibility, because we don't know what next year brings, right? We don't know, where we'll want to automate, how we'll want to automate. And so having a vendor that could be neutral, having a vendor that could provide API connectivity allowed for us to perform very important integrations. And so now with this foundation in place, with the concrete poured, we can build out our house as leadership needs. Last thing I note here is build-in automation. It's the future of cryptographic deployment. Hey, it's no surprise certificates are not used for web certs anymore, not just for web certs. You've got the client certificates, but with all the network complexity out there, and the need, whether it's things like SSL offloading or bridging, you've got all various network segments. You've got short-lived certificates, right? Apple and the whole browser foundation back in September 1st last year, announcing that public certificates are only good for 13 months. Well, now you've got your administrators that are coming in and, now twice as often they have to come in and do their deployments. So this just means more and more automation, and it's a necessary component. So get ready, because certs are going to be doubling, tripling, quadrupling. You're going to notice, a greater demand for certificate processes. So making sure that we were ready for scalability, and that the vendor that we chose was going to be future ready and can work with us as the future unfolds. Why did Xcel Energy choose AppViewX? So like I said, our journey started with Gartner and David Motti over there, and he told us to bring in 3 separate vendors. So, we brought in the big guys and we brought in the smaller guys, and we, had our list of requirements that were out there. And so let me speak to a few of these reasons behind our decision. So I mentioned automation. We really look for a way that would be easy and frictionless, a way that was going to be scalable, a way that people could fend for themselves and obtain their own certificates. We look for API integration and integration with other tools. I mentioned integration that we had with CyberArk. We also have an integration with our vulnerability scanner. So internally, we use Nexpose Rapid 7. And in our OT networks, we use Tenable, Nessus Tenable. And the reason that we use these is, number one, our vulnerability scanning team does not want a separate device scanner, right? They don't want an additional port scanner. They don't want every cybersecurity tool to come in and perform their own scanning. We wanted to leverage that. Now, why is it? Why did we want all that information? Well, if you recall, one of the problems that we had is we had this whole group of certificates that we could see on our CAs, right? We can look in the DigiCert account. We can look on our Active Directory Certificate Services signing, the CAs, and we could see those, but we didn't quite know where on the network these things were deployed. And quite often, certificates have multiple names inside, right? It might have a C name in there, might have an A record, it might have a, maybe that certificate goes on the load balancer, but then that very same certificate also gets deployed to the back-end web servers or to a process server. An application might throw in 7, 8 different names into a certificate. And so for full visibility, we wanted to make sure that we knew which certificates were being deployed where. So with this Rapid7 integration, we could do an API call into Rapid7 and obtain the IP address and port number. And suddenly we could add that to the inventory. So now we could look up mail.xcelenergy.com and we could know that SSL certificate mail.xcelenergy.com is deployed to these 41 servers. So, that's great, because come certificate expiration time and renewal time, you'll want to make sure that you don't miss any of those. So that was a big win for us. Next, for certificate, the full lifecycle management. So, we want it to be easy, relatively easy with approvals for folks to revoke their certificates or silence their certificates, right? We send out a notice saying, hey, your certificate XYZ expires in 30 days, 20, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. Well, those folks, after they fulfill that requirement and they renew the certificate on, let's say, day 13, they don't want to receive a whole bunch of additional email notifications about the one that they just replaced last night. So we also give them the ability to log into our self-service portal and silence those notifications. So that is part of that's part of the certificate lifecycle management, is the ability to maybe silence or revoke, right, renew. So yeah, again, kind of one-stop shopping, one portal. Document signing certificates. We also have some code signing certificates. That's been a bit of a challenge. So not so much the mechanism itself, but with COVID, we had an interesting challenge in that, contracts, sales contracts, legal contracts, HR contracts, things that used to be signed by executive leadership in ink could no longer be done in ink because people are all working out of their homes. So we need to figure out a way in which to deploy document signing certificates out to those executives so that their signature was now digital. So that was a bit of a COVID-19 challenge for us. And then finally, the alerts and monitoring. Entire groups can be monitored rather their group of certificates. We can proactively send out on a quarterly basis and let folks know just how much longevity they have on their certs. But this, when it really came down to it, we had our enterprise architects and the full team of project that came out and assessed these tools. But ultimately, it really came down to one thing, and why we choose AppViewX, and that's this last slide right here. The reason that we chose AppViewX is because of the people. When we opened up the doors and the full team of AppViewX leadership came walking in our door, and we knew that they were serious about our business. We knew that they cared about us. We knew that they were going to be in this journey for the long haul. And it was so easy for us to place our trust in a vendor that cared. And I've seen this throughout the entire organization. Even in doing this presentation, folks like, and I'm going to call her out by name, Shivesha, the folks behind the scenes, the folks in sales, the executive leadership, the engineers, Josh, Salas, Kevin, Gregory Webb, Prabhakar. I could go on and on. Marley, Harshana. I could call out so many wonderful people that I've met at AppViewX. And so this isn't, look, this is a very high tech industry that we're in. But the truth is, this is a human-centered industry. And you want to find a partner that's going to walk down and fight with you, right? Because we've got a whole lot of work to do in the future. And it's an exploding industry, and you want to find people that you can trust. And I find that to be a rarity. I've been in IT for 25 years, and it's hard to find a vendor that cares and cares as much as AppViewX has. So yeah, don't be fooled. The solution is human-centered, and so careful who you choose as a vendor. And yeah. So that is my presentation. We've got a Q&A, so I will check on some of the questions here. I did get a question in advance. Let's see if I can navigate this here. How do we quantify the value of using certificate lifecycle management solution in any environment? Oh my goodness, isn't that a good question? Quantifying. What's interesting about the field of engineering is, we're always here to solve. We come in here and we try to solve problems through automation and efficiencies, and I think a successful engineer will implement an automated solution and then walk away, right, and on to the next problem. And so it's oftentimes hard to quantify those things. We have this sense of maybe intuition. A lot of times things are rather hard to measure. Being in the field for as many years as I have been, you kind of get a feel for, where those necessary efficiencies need to happen, right? And you pay attention to the news and the new protocols that are coming out, new challenges that are coming out. You want to get ahead of those things. So you kind of keep your ear to the ground and you anticipate the problems, right? You're thinking about, how to solve this now at the front end. And so, but the actual measurement, oh man, I've never been good at estimation. I had another question come in with regards to how to avoid, here's the question, how to avoid certificates issued from unauthorized CAs. And the answer there is certificate transparency reports and CAA records. So for example, Xcel Energy, we have a CAA record in place that says only DigiCert and GlobalSign can sign our certificates, right? So then we can run certificate transparency reports, and those are reports of every public certificate that have been signed under the domain name xcelenergy.com, right? And so you get a sense for, well, who's issued, and are there any renegades out there, and are there any public CAs that are not doing their due diligence, right? You can go out there and revoke certificates from, let's say it was VeriSign or Symantec from long ago, right? and you could get those reissued by the CAs that you trust. So my answer to how to avoid certificates issued from unauthorized CAs, one is making sure that you have a CAA record in place. And number two is running those certificate transparency reports, maybe annually or every 6 months. Let's see. Companies, here's another one, great one. Companies are shifting to Industry 4.0. What additional threats can companies face because of this movement? What steps should companies take to secure themselves in such an environment? Can you touch upon PKI requirements of such an environment? Well, Industry 4.0, you think about things like artificial intelligence, machine learning. From a PKI perspective, I think of IoT, right? And what this means is you've got all sorts of devices out there that are now, they're open to vulnerabilities, right? They're not within our traditional trusted perimeter. They're now out there on the edge, so the Mirai botnet attack that took place a number of years back, right? Taking over all of these security cameras and IoT devices and then causing a distributed DNS attack. Absolutely. The challenge that presents itself with these IoT devices is even more sophisticated and complex. So, the most basic way in which to, or foundational way in which to secure these IoT devices is with PKI services. So PKI certificates, kind of those working with the working with the manufacturers, working with the all the way down to the cryptographic chips and the TPMs that are available on those devices, deploying certificates, renewing certificates. So Industry 4.0, hey, yet one more reason to invest in PKI. Let's see. Reports. So Kevin asked a question, how to follow up on reports, who is responsible for, and how are the reports sent out? So our reports are sent out via email, nothing more sophisticated, just pretty simple. And what we do is we just know the group, right? We know the group of that's responsible, that's tied to that certificate. Members could come and go, right? It can be a turnstile environment. So what we do know is that certificate's going to expire in 30 days. So dynamically, we'll do a lookup right then at the 30-day mark. We'll see who are the current members of that group, and we'll send out an email to those members of the group. No need to worry about who was in the group 2 years ago or whatnot. We just know that groups have a lot more persistence than individuals do. So great question. With that, I think I will go ahead and turn it over. And thank you very much again for this great opportunity. And thanks for inviting an engineer to speak today. I appreciate that.